Hi, hello. So, welcome back to the channel. Today we have a review for you, and it's part of September, which is where all month long I'm going to be reading primarily self-published titles. I don't actually have any non-self-published stuff to read this month, so pretty exciting. I've got a load of self-published novels by a load of really interesting authors across different genres, so not just the main genre of fantasy. So stick around, like and subscribe, and follow the journey through self-pub. Now, today's review is The Way of Edan by Philip Chase. So many of you may know Philip Chase is a fantasy YouTuber. I first came across his content when he appeared on the Mike's Book Reviews channel talking about Robin Hobb's Realm of the Elderlings. And you can see some of that kind of character-focused storytelling that you get from Robin Hobb in The Way of Edan. Now, I bought this book with my own money. Philip Chase does follow me on Twitter now, and we have interacted a couple of times. However, that was before I had read the majority of this novel. And I think that almost everyone who's read it has said it's great. So I also am saying it's great. And I don't think that you can attribute that to the fact that Philip follows me on Twitter. Follow me on Twitter, by the way, if you want, at SGCH. This is a very disjointed review, but I'm going to go straight back to it. First thing I want to do for you guys is read the back cover, so you've got a little bit of an idea of what the book is about. The kingdom of the Eternal will awaken when the Way of Edan holds sway over all of Jormungand. So say the prophecies. With unrivaled power in the gift, the supreme priest Bledla leads Torland and its mighty army to convert rival kingdoms by the sword and by the fang. Among the gathering resistance is the sorceress Sequara, whose mission is to protect her island and her Andumaic faith from the Torlanders' aggression. As holy war looms over the kingdoms of Jormungand, a chance encounter bestows a terrible curse upon a young man. Dayraven's curse may help decide Jormungand's fate, but first, with the help of unlikely friends, he must survive the shattering of his world. That describes the story pretty elegantly, to be honest. So your protagonist is a character called Dayraven. He is a country boy from the backwoods in a little town called Kinsford, in a part of the world called the Mark. Now, the Mark is kind of like a provincial, small, kind of little country. His dad is a famous warrior. So Dayraven's dad once saved the life of the king of Torland and was given a ancient and very, very valuable sword, which I'm sure will come into things eventually. I mean, you can't have a sword with a name and it not be important. But so Dayraven just has a very simple life. You know, he trains with his dad to sword fight. He tends the farm, and he spends time with his girlfriend Ebba, who he's engaged to marry. So you get to spend a little bit of time in Dayraven's life before the kind of inciting incident, and it's a really nice kind of chilled and pastoral life that he's got. And he actually, when the inciting incident happens, when something happens and he's given this curse, which bestows upon him incredible power, he doesn't kind of lust after this power. He doesn't want to rule the world, doesn't want to save the world. He just wants to live his normal life back with his girlfriend and his dad and his farm and his friends. And you see that a lot in that he doesn't want the power that he has. He's that reluctant hero trope that you see in a lot of things, although I don't feel like you see that very much in fantasy. Most of the books that I read, the characters are kind of stepping up to their responsibility and using their power, where Dayraven kind of wants rid of it in many cases. Also from the mark, we have two other major characters. So you have his great aunt, whose name is ERD. ERD is a powerful witch or sorceress or something. We'll talk about the magic in a bit. And she is the one who realizes that Dayraven has this power, and she kind of puts him in the right direction to start training with and using his power to save the world, which is what she believes he's destined to do. The other main character from the mark is Imhar. Imhar is a former slave or a bondsman. I'm not 100% clear on the difference, but bondsman, I would say, he's owned by Dayraven's father. However, the relationship seems to be quite friendly. So, like, I don't know whether it's just that Dayraven's dad treats him well, but he does seem to be a slave, and he's referred to as being captured by slavers. But he's also called a bondsman during the book. So, bondsman, I think, is just a nice way of saying slave, maybe. So Imhar is a really interesting character. He's a few years older than Dayraven, but they grew up very close together. So Dayraven and Imhar see each other kind of as brothers. Imhar's kind of, his whole thing is that he's like attractive, and he's a womanizer, which is it comes up multiple times, and it's always funny whenever it does. Also the other issue is that Imhar has kind of the complication with Imhar is that whilst he's this very kind of like outwardly happy-go-lucky and womanizing guy, he on the inside is struggling to deal with his repressed memories over his family being murdered and being sold into slavery, and some other stuff that I won't mention in the video, but it was pretty dark. It's not good. It's not sort. It doesn't. I mean, you could probably guess what happens to certain members of his family, but it's not something I think that if you have struggled with that sort of those acts represented in fiction, I don't think you'll struggle here, because they're only referred to, not kind of described. It's not like George R.R. Martin. Speaking of what it's like, I think that the biggest thing, and the thing that I want to heap the most praise on Philip for, is that this book has the classic fantasy prose. So it has songs, it has much more like imaginative and interesting names. We're not looking at like a Dan or a Paul. We're looking at like Dayraven, Imhar, Bledler. Bledler's my favourite name in the whole book. I don't know why. Every time I read it, I was like, this guy's got such a weird name, and I love it. But so he has this classic fantasy style, but he has made that prose really accessible. And one of the things that I was often noticing was that instead of expecting you to know the word, Philip's giving you these context clues in the rest of the dialogue or the sentence, which push you to understand what that word is. So he's maybe using, he talks a lot about, I think it's pronounced briny, I'm not sure, and which is a piece of armour. It's the like chainmail shirt. And he talks a lot, he mentions that a lot, and they refer to it a lot. But one of the first times that they refer to it, he then describes it afterwards. So even for a dum-dum like me, who much prefers usually prefers a modern prose style, where something like Brandon Sanderson, Stephen King, Ryan Kyle, very accessible modern style prose, The Way of Edan is not that, but he's still made it accessible by giving you all this context. It's like how sometimes when you read a sequel and they will go over, characters will go over in dialogue what's happened in previous books. He's kind of giving you that context, that accessibility, which makes the book, even though it's really beautifully written, it's got this excellent prose, it still means it's really, really readable. And so readable, in fact, that I read this in massive chunks most of the time I sat down to read it. So I would often, I read this over a few days, but most of it was read by putting the kid to sleep, coming downstairs, sitting down on the sofa, and just reading until bedtime. And I got really absorbed and engrossed in the book. The other thing that I really liked was you get to see the point of view not just from the protagonist and the kind of good guys, as it were. This is something that you see a lot in. So if you look at multi-POV books, like, say, for example, Sanderson's Stormlight Archive, you might get like one point of view from a antagonist. But in Way of Edan, we spend like a decent chunk of the book with the priests of Edan, who are the antagonists to Dayraven and his kind of crew of rebels. The priests are really interesting because they don't just show you their motives, which are a little more complex than they want to rule the world, and they also show you the internal politics among the priests of the Way, and I thought that was really interesting. While we're talking about the priests of the Way, let's go straight into the magic system. So the magic system is awesome. It's a soft magic system, which I'm actually often finding myself preferring. So you have the really hard magic systems like you see in Brandon Sanderson, and then you have something like the singing that they do in the Way of Edan. So people who have something called the gift, which is almost kind of like the mutant gene in X-Men, where if you have the gift, it means you have access to this magic system. So people basically essentially are magical or not. But some people have a higher strength in the gift. So, for example, the Supreme Priest Bledler is the strongest in the gift in the known world. And then after Dayraven is afflicted by this curse, it says that his power is so strong that she felt the urge to run away. You know, like natural survival instinct was to just run away from him, even though he's her great nephew. The way that the gift is used is through a couple of things. So there's something called the World of Forms, where a gift user can kind of pull back and see the world in kind of a different space, and kind of see and manipulate the energy of the world. And then the other thing, which I think is really cool, is the songs. So if you know, for example, the Song of Origin, it's called. So if you know the Song of Origin of a human being, for example, you can heal their wounds, because the people with the gift can sing the song, and if they're powerful enough in the gift, it can restore people. And I think it's really, and they also do something later in the novel where the priests of the Way know the Song of Origin for some monsters like trolls, and they sing the Song of Origin, and then they can control them. So they forcibly mind control these monsters and put them in the army, and send them as the first wave of assault against their enemies, which is and the descriptions are really vivid and brutal of kind of what's going on with these monsters. which is really, really cool. The battle scenes are really interesting and really well written as well. I never was reading it and going, okay, so the sword's here, it's there, it's what's going on. I was never confused. It was always really clear what was going on. And the prose continued to be just as kind of lyrical and interesting throughout the battle scenes as well. That, you know, Philip doesn't dumb it down so that it's easier to understand. He keeps going and using the same style that he's used all the way through. And that is something that you do see with some self-pub authors, is that they'll be very kind of one way during their dialogue and another during their action sequences, and then Philip doesn't do that at all. So overall, I have rated this one as a 4 out of 5. I actually have to say that if Goodreads allowed, I'd have probably gone for a 4.5 out of 5. It's not a perfect book, and some of that does have to do with the kind of diversion. So the main characters are on their way to do a thing, and that's kind of their stated quest at the beginning of the book, and then they divert into something else. And the diversion that they go into was good. It was well written. It introduced some really cool new characters, but I often think of that lecture that Sanderson gives on plot, where he's like, oh, if you say that a character is going to do a thing, then they should do a thing. And now, whenever that comes up in novels, I'm like, oh, I am a bit disappointed that they said they were going to do that and then they didn't do it. But that's like the most minor nitpick. I'll give my age-old nitpick now. And this is me being petty, and the petty me is going to say some of the chapters are too long. Some of the chapters are 30 plus pages without a protagonist, and they're kind of like not in the like final climax chapters, which I've always said I'm okay with being as long as necessary. Some of the chapters are a little long. I am the kind of reader who struggles, and I really dislike ending my session of reading when I'm not at the end of a chapter. But if you have like a half an hour long chapter, well, not half an hour, like a 30 odd page chapter, I might be fine when I start reading that chapter, but a few pages in I might start to feel sleepy, and then I'm forcing myself to read this chapter while sleepy. And yes, this is absolutely a me problem, but it always brings down my opinion of a book. And if I was being totally fair and I was trying to be more objective, then this would probably be closer to that 5-star range, because I really enjoyed it. I loved the characters. I can't wait to see what's next. And Philip has mentioned that people on the whole thought the next book was better and was kind of faster paced. And the pacing, I didn't really have an issue, because I do enjoy a book that has a slower pace. However, if this novel had a much faster pace, then again, maybe it would have been a 5-star read for me. And I would imagine that the next book could be that 5-star read. Phillips also said in an interview that I watched recently that the third and final book is the most experimental. And that's really interesting to me, because I wouldn't say that The Way of Edan is traditional. I would say it apes that classic fantasy of things like The Lord of the Rings, but it has a much more modern sense of story and plot, and much deeper characters. I mean, in The Lord of the Rings, some of the characters might as well be cardboard cutouts, but in Way of Edan, every single character had kind of an interesting nuance, and they had something to, each character has something to say. I'm just going to quickly check my notes to make sure I've not missed anything. I think I didn't really talk about Sequara, who you don't see too much of in the book. She has a few POV chapters, and it's through her that you get a lot of your understanding of how the magic system works, because she kind of talks it over in her internal monologue. And Sequara's from this. She's the next in line to be queen of this island nation, where the queen chooses her own successor because she doesn't. She's not allowed to have ties and relationships. So obviously she can't have a child. But they what they do is they go and pick the girls in the island who have the most strength in the gift, and then she spends time with them, trains them, and whoever she thinks is best, she then recruits to be the new queen. And that's what Sequara has. So it's almost kind of like the Jedi in that she's not allowed to form these attachments. So she's kind of fighting against her emotions and her feelings. And you see this a few times through the novel, that she notices that she has grown attached to a character or something. And she then kind of pulls herself back and she tries to regain that regal bearing. And I thought that was really interesting. I would definitely like to see a lot more of her. And I think she's on the cover of the next book, so cross your fingers. And she's also, I was about to spoil the end of the book then. Well, that would have been so rude. Anyway, I'd love to hear from you if you have read Way of Edan. I'm super looking forward to the next book in the series. I was genuinely considering breaking the Self-Pub September TBR and just reading it straight away. But I think that it's more in the spirit of the experiment of trying all these new authors if I try a ton of book ones, all from different authors across the month. So I've pulled down a huge list from Kindle Unlimited, and I'm really looking forward to reading them. So stick around, as I said earlier. Make sure to subscribe to the channel to see future Self-Pub September stuff. And I think that tomorrow, the video for tomorrow is going to be my weekly wrap up. So if you want to see what I started reading after I finished Way of Edan, then tune in tomorrow and I'll talk a little bit about it. And I will speak to you guys soon.